Hello, class, and welcome to Interviewing Techniques, Week 7. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and I'm your instructor for this course. Within this class, we'll be exploring the most exciting and hopeful aspects of motivational interviewing. The whole idea of eliciting change talk. Now, we introduced that a little bit last class, but change talk is any speech that leans toward making a positive change. It might be quiet, it might be uncertain or surrounded by doubt, but it represents that spark of motivation that's really at the core of counseling. And your job as the counselor is to fan that spark into a flame, and to do it without pressure or persuasion, but simply to reflect and evoke within the client. So today we'll learn how to recognize that change talk, how to evoke that change talk, and respond to that change talk effectively. As always, within my lectures, I'd like to start off with a little story. And then the three main themes that we'll be exploring are, first off, I want to understand the nature and function of change talk. And then we'll go back to a technique that I introduced in our first lecture, the technique of eliciting change talk using what we call the darn cat model. And then finally, we'll close out our lecture with reinforcing a little bit of that change talk in order to build some momentum in the counseling session. Remember that all of these processes are going on at the same time. We are evoking, we're reflecting, we are looking for discrepancies, and we're looking for and identifying change talk. And while the ratio of these things might change from one session to the next, they will all likely be there in one way, shape, or form. And because this process is not linear, people are complex. So just kind of remember that. Now, as we dive into our story for today, I'd like to introduce you to Stephen Rolnick. I was born in 1952. He's a clinical psychologist, originally from Wales. And he's one of these people that co-developed motivational interviewing. If you remember the fellow by the name of William Miller, we introduced him as founder of motivational interviewing. Well, Stephen Rolnick is kind of his partner in this development process. And Rolnick's work really kind of emphasizes the importance of language in fostering behavioral change. And that's why how we speak is just as important as what we say in motivational interviewing. He developed these kind of practical applications for motivational interviewing. And that use of language has become very important, not only in healthcare, but also in addiction services. And what he's done is introduce some structured methods that can help practitioners evoke change talk using things like curiosity and, of course, compassion and empathy and respect for autonomy. And his teachings really do continue to influence professionals across different disciplines, from medicine to education and behavioral health, through to addictions counseling. So just be mindful of whenever you hear the name Stephen Rolnick, you can understand that he is very much at the heart of the language that we use for evoking change and for identifying change talk. Now, What is change talk? Well, change talk refers to a client's own arguments for change. So they're not things that we come up with as a counselor, but as we are existing and exploring within the client's lived world, these are moments when the client expresses a desire for change, or the ability for change, or the reasons for change, or the need for change, or the hope for change. So, unlike advice from a counselor, change talk reflects the internal motivations of the client. I'm going to say that again. Unlike the advice from the counselor, so we don't want to give advice. Instead, we want to evoke change talk that reflects the internal motivations of the client. When clients hear themselves express the reasons for change, then they're more likely to follow through. They respect themselves deep down. They listen to themselves deep down. And so when they give the reasons for change, they are more likely to follow through. Now, if you recall, I have kind of covered the darn cat model before, but we're going to kind of go through it again, just so you have a little bit of a reminder of this, because this is kind of the place where we want to be exploring change talk. The darn cat model is basically this. It helps us to understand and identify the different types of change talk there are. So first off, we have desire. Things like, I want to do this. There's a longing there, a desire for change. Then there's the ability for change. I could do this. There's the reason for change. It would help if I changed this. There's the need for change. The I have to do this. I have to change. That's the darn. Then we come to the cat. And the cat is the actions part of this. The commitment. I'm going to do this change. The activation part of this. I've started to make this change. And the taking steps. The I did this in order to help facilitate this change. So the darn cat represents all of those frames of that change process, of the change talk, the desire for change, the ability for change, the reason for change, the need for change. That's the darn. And then the cat is the commitment to the change, the activation towards the change, and taking steps towards that change. Now, how do we elicit change talk? Remember, we don't impose change talk, we elicit, we draw that out from the client. And we do that by open-ended questions designed to evoke reflection. How would things be different if you made this change? That would be one question you might ask. How does it feel with the kind of person, how does it fit with the kind of person you want to be? That would be another change question. What are the good things about changing? Okay, remember, you're eliciting thoughts and talk about change. You're not imposing change, you're not directing change. You are getting them to elicit the change from within themselves. And in so doing, you're affirming their strengths, you're reflecting back their positive intentions, and you're allowing some silence for them to process through all of this. It doesn't need to be a rush. They don't need to give the answer right away. Be slow, be patient, be relaxed. All of that goes a long ways to being a good counselor. Now, With change also comes sustainment of that change. And sustainment talk, or sustained talk, is the opposite of change, which is they just want things to stay the same. They express reasons not to change. I can't quit. It helps me to cope. They're fighting against their own desires. And rather than arguing, just reflect back that ambivalence. Remember, ambivalence helps them. It's a natural process. It's not necessarily defensiveness. It is part of them being honest with themselves. Part of you relies on this, and part of you wonders if it's hurting more than it's helping. That might be something you want to say. And this keeps the conversation open, and it keeps the conversation non-judgmental. So you can respond to sustainment talk, not by shutting it down, but by using it to reflect the ambivalence that is in their own self. Now, how do we reinforce and deepen change talk? When you hear change talk, highlight it. That sounds really important to you. You've been thinking a lot about this, haven't you? You just said something powerful. Can we go back to that? All of these things would be ways of letting the client know that you've heard them, and it helps them to hear themselves wanting to change. It builds belief in their own readiness for change, all of which can be very helpful. So when we look at this and we practice this sort of thing, the client might say something like, I need to stop drinking, especially after what happened last weekend. And our response might be something like, something about what happened last weekend really shook you. You're feeling a strong need to stop. Okay? You're just reflecting back, but you're reinforcing that change at the same time. You're not directing. The client might say, I made it 2 days without using. And you as the counselor might say, that's a big step. You're already taking some action. And in that, you're reflecting back, you're echoing their commitment, their successes. You're helping to anchor the client's motivation in that moment. Remember, in this kind of interviewing, you are looking to evoke motivation within the client themselves. And remember, this is a slow process. This is about evoking, not fixing. Evoking is long-lasting. Fixing is something that's imposed and is often rebelled against. That's just the way people are. So avoid the righting reflex. The righting reflex is the urge to correct, when a counselor wants to give advice and fix or correct what is going on. When a client expresses doubt or backslides, they avoid jumping in. Instead of saying, you should do this, you say something like, you're torn right now, and you made progress before. What this does is it builds confidence rather than reinforcing resistance. Okay? You want to go with the person's strengths. You don't want the person to just be pleasing you. You want them to be pleasing themselves, to have the emotional motivation to keep the change going. That is what creates long-lasting change. So as we close out this lecture, 3 key terms I want to highlight. First off, the whole idea of change talk. What is that? Those are statements simply in favor of change. When we talk about sustained talk, what are we talking about? We're talking about arguments for the status quo, for not changing. And you're going to have both within any counseling session, because people are conflicted. There's a reason why they are in an addiction, because it does something for them, and that's the sustained talk. But at the same time, they know that this is not a way to continue life. And that's the change talk. And you need to help them to find the ambivalence there and to move towards the change talk without using what we call the righting reflex, which is our last term here. And that is the impulse to fix or correct the client's behavior. So what's an example of change talk? An example of change talk would be something like here in B. I guess I could start cutting back. That would be change talk. So as we close out this lecture, just remember that change talk is one of the most powerful forces in counseling. But it's not something the counselor does. It's must come from the client. So this week we've practiced asking questions that invite change. So as you go through your time talking with people this week, invite and explore and look for some of that change talk that is going on in people's lives and reflect the hopeful parts of what the client says. And when you hear a glimmer of motivation, no matter how small, hold it up and let it shine so that the client can hear themselves and the spark that they have within them. And it's your job to fan that flame of change. You don't have to generate change. You just need to help the client discover their own reasons for the change. And here's the important thing: to help the client discover their own reasons in their own time. Don't rush this. Just keep listening for that turning point. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and I will see you next week. You take care.